Hello everyone, today we are talking about part 2 of 4 of Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. If you haven't seen part 1, go watch the video for that, because obviously we're continuing for where we left off. So if you remember, we left off with Alyosha reading the love letter from Lise. So, part 2 starts off with Alyosha in the monastery. He's talking to Father Zosima. Father Zosima says, hey, I'm not going to die today. Remember, Zosima's on his deathbed. So he's like, I'm not going to die today. Don't worry. Go out, find your brother, and come back later. I have something to tell you. So Alyosha reluctantly kind of leaves the monastery, and he's walking to the Khokhlakovs, right? So Lise, her last name is Khokhlakov, and she's living with her mother. On his walk there, Alyosha runs into some schoolboys, and there's a group of 5 or 6 of them throwing rocks at this one kid. So Alyosha's like, okay, what the heck's going on? That group of kids like, well, the one guy started it, we're just kind of retaliating. So Alyosha goes to try to figure out what's wrong with the one kid. And as he's walking over, the kid kind of like runs away and is like throwing rocks at him. And eventually Alyosha gets close, and then the kid kind of just like bites his finger and almost bites it off. It goes right to the bone and then just runs away. And so Alyosha is like very vexed, very confused, but he's very Christ-like, right? Doesn't get mad or retaliate or anything. He just kind of is confused. And so he keeps walking, gets to the Khokhlakovs' house, and Lise gets a few moments alone with him. And so she's like, hey, give me back my love letter. It was a joke. And Alyosha's like, no, I don't think so. I don't have the letter, by the way. I left it at the monastery. And so she's like, oh, dang, like... And then she tells him to come back because she wants to talk to him. But then in the meantime, Mrs. Khokhlakov, her mom, calls Alyosha upstairs, and there's Katerina and Ivan up there. Now, if you remember, Ivan loves Katerina. Katerina is betrothed to Dmitri. Now, Dmitri thinks she's cool, but doesn't love her because he thinks he's a worm and thinks he doesn't deserve her. He is in love with the village prostitute, Grushenka. So Ivan wants to convince... Katerina that Dmitri will never marry her because he's a slime ball. And Alyosha goes up there, and he's kind of reluctant to speak what he thinks, but he eventually does, and he kind of blurts out that, hey, like, Katerina, I think you should marry Ivan. You should cut off your engagement with Dmitri. And I think that is the right call, but in any case, it's not well received. So Ivan is like, well, there's no point, like, I'm leaving for Moscow tomorrow, so see ya. And then Katerina is like completely devoted to Dmitri despite his antics. And so she is resolved to just support him in any way, even though he doesn't love her back. It's very strange. And so they're kind of like, whoa, Alyosha, like, that was kind of out of line, like, why did you say that? And he's like, oh, sorry, I'm just trying to be nice. And then as he's leaving, obviously his fingers had to be bandaged, so they had asked him, like, hey, what happened to your finger? And he's like, well, this boy bit it. And Katerina is like, oh, like, I know that boy. It's the son of this army general guy who lives in the city. And the reason why he's getting picked on is because Dmitri was at a bar getting drunk, and somehow this guy offended him, and he took the general by his beard and dragged him through the street. And now all the kids at school are making fun of his son because the dad didn't defend himself against Dmitri. And so Katerina is very rich, and so she gives 200 rubles to Alyosha to deliver to the man. And so Alyosha departs from the Khokhlakov house. And so then he runs into, or he doesn't run into, sorry, he reaches the house of the man who was assaulted by Dmitri. And it's not really a house, it's kind of more like a shed. Now, this guy is living there with a few kids. One of his daughters is like paraplegic, and his wife had like a nervous illness or breakdown, so like no one in the house really works. They're destitute, and there's really no way out for them. They want to move somewhere else so that they can kind of restart their life, because they've kind of fallen in the social ranks. And obviously the son is getting teased real bad and doesn't want to go to school, so it's kind of just a bad situation. And so Alyosha goes on a walk with the dad, and at the end they have a discussion. At the end of the walk, he's like, "Here's this money. It's from Katerina, and the man is like accepts it very gratefully. He's like, oh, thank you. And then all of a sudden he just has like this fit. He crumples the money and throws it down and runs off, under the pretense, I guess, that he's very proud and doesn't feel like he's able to accept the money, because if he accepts it, he's like not strong, or like it doesn't want to accept help from other people, basically. So yeah, that's a very interesting interaction there. After that, Alyosha catches up with, I think I might have my chronology wrong. Anyways, somehow Ivan and Alyosha end up at lunch together, and they have this really crazy discussion, and that's probably like not the kernel, but kind of like the central point of part 2 is this discussion between Ivan and Alyosha. So they start off with a discussion, and then the second part is kind of the poem, but it's not really a poem, it's in prose, but this short story by Ivan called The Grand Inquisitor. So firstly, in their discussion, Ivan touches on a lot of points, but the main thing is they're trying to discuss God and like whether or not God is real. And so one of the hang-ups that Ivan has with faith and with God and Christianity is that he doesn't think that men are capable of loving other people, because he doesn't feel capable of loving other people. He thinks that men and humanity can only be loved at a distance, but as soon as you get close to somebody and you know them personally, it's hard to express that love to them. And he gives all these examples of horrible things that people do, and he's like, well, how can you love somebody if they've done that? And then he has this thing where he says, well, like this person did this horrible thing, like they killed an innocent person. Would you condemn this person to death? Would you shoot them? And Alyosha is like very reluctant, but he's like, yes, they should be shot. And Ivan kind of chuckles at that, and he says, well, you have a little devil in you too, Alyosha. I suppose he's inferring that the perfect Christian wouldn't like pass that kind of judgment on other people, which I think is like maybe a false belief. But anyways, so then after that, Ivan goes into the Grand Inquisitor. So the premise of the Grand Inquisitor is that, is it set during the Spanish Revolution, or what's it called again? The Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition. I think it might be, just because of the title of the story. Anyways, that's not super relevant. Anyways, the point is that Jesus comes back in like 1700s, and he kind of starts healing people in the village square, and one of the high up magistrates in the Catholic Church comes up and says, "What are you doing? Like, you're going to jail." And he arrests Jesus for healing people, which is kind of like a parody, obviously, of the Pharisees in the New Testament. And so then the majority of the Grand Inquisitor is the Grand Inquisitor just speaking to Jesus in prison, and Jesus just doesn't say anything. He's silent the entire time. And so the Grand Inquisitor is basically his whole speech is trying to explain why Jesus can't come back and start healing people. And the point that he's trying to make is that free will is too heavy of a burden for people to bear. And so his argument is that when Jesus denied Satan 3 times in the desert, those 3 temptations that he overcame gave people free will. And the Grand Inquisitor doesn't like that. He says free will is too heavy a burden. People want security instead. You should just force them to do the right thing that's good for them, and not give them the free will, because if they have the free will, they're just going to abuse it. And so, I mean, I don't want to get too much into the details, but that's the gist of the argument. And then at the end, he's like, "What do you have to say about that?" And Jesus just gets up and kisses him and sits back down and says nothing. And then it's a very strange story. And then the Grand Inquisitor ends up deciding not to condemn Jesus to death, but instead just lets him go and says, "Don't ever show your face around here again." And then Ivan, once he finishes the story, he's like, "Alyosha, what do you think about that?" And Alyosha just gets up and kisses him and like kind of parodies his story, and Ivan thinks that's quite funny. And anyways, their discussion ends. But yeah, they go into a lot of like theological, philosophical stuff there. So if you want like a better summary or analysis, you should go read it. But that's the gist of it. After that, again, my chronology might be slightly wrong, but like somewhere after that, Ivan is walking back to his father's house, Fyodor, and he runs into one of the servants, which is potentially his illegitimate brother, Smerdyakov. And Smerdyakov is in a very tight spot, and he's trying to explain it to Ivan. So Smerdyakov is basically hinting that he might have one of his like annual epileptic fits. But usually, of course, the epileptic fits are random. But he's hinting at the fact that one might come on purpose. And the reason he's saying that is because Fyodor is sitting in his house every night waiting for Grushenka to come and sleep with him because he's offered her like 3,000 rubles. And she's kind of teasing him that she'll come, but she won't really. Now, Dmitri is in love with Grushenka as well. And he says that if she shows up, he's going to kill his father. Now, Gregory, the other main servant, and his wife are both sick. And so Dmitri has like cornered Smerdyakov and said, if you don't tell me when Grushenka has come, I'm going to kill you first, and then my father. So Smerdyakov's in a tight spot, right? Because he doesn't want to betray Fyodor, but he doesn't want to get killed by Dmitri either. So he's the only servant in the house because the other ones are sick, but now he's in this tight spot where he doesn't know what to do. So he's basically like, yeah, I'm going to have an epileptic fit. And it just really puts like a weird taste in Ivan's mouth. Like he kind of understands the situation, and he's like, I don't like where this is going. I don't like Smerdyakov. Like, I just need to get out of here. So he stays the night at Fyodor's, and he kind of has this scene where he's like tearing up at the staircase, listening to his father, like putz around in the basement, or on the main floor, sorry, waiting for Grushenka, and he's kind of just like feels bad for him, I guess, or like has this like moment where he thinks he should act but doesn't. Anyways, nothing happens that night. He gets up and he's like, hey, I'm leaving for Moscow. See ya. And his dad's like, are you sure? Please, can you actually do this one favor for me in this nearby town? I'd really like you to close this business deal. They have this conversation. He's like, finally he agrees to it. Gets in a carriage, goes to do the business deal, and halfway there, he's like, screw this. And he just changes his plans and goes to Moscow. So his dad thinks he's going to a small town, but he's actually taking off to Moscow. And he has like regret when he's like most of the way there. But anyways, and then on cue, the next day, Smerdyakov falls down the stairs of the cellar and gets his epileptic fit. The last part of part 2 is we get Father Zosima's life story. So Alyosha ends up back at the monastery. Father Zosima is not dead yet, as promised, and he tells the story of his life. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. I really like this part. This took up a big section as well. And there's a few parts of his story I want to touch on. So the first is the death of his older brother. So when Zosima is young, he has a very sick older brother. And he was the gist of, I'm missing a bunch of details, but essentially he was very cynical, and then he has this like encounter with death, and then all of a sudden, as soon as he is like on his deathbed and he's only got a few months left to live, he starts going to church again, and he basically just turns his whole life around. Like he stops being like mean and cynical, he starts being kind to people and loving and all that, and yeah, he just starts having these like revelations of like divine ecstasy and happiness and like joy, and it really has a profound impact on Father Zosima and influences him to pursue like a holy life. But before that, he kind of like gives up on his faith and kind of forgets about it. And before he becomes a monk, he is in the army. So he's not a father at this point, right? So just Zosima. I forget what his first name is. Anyways, so he's in the army, and what spurs this on again? I don't remember what exactly spurs this on, but he ends up in this situation where he has to duel this other guy. And so he knows that one of them will die tomorrow. It's a pistol duel. They're both like ready to do it. And he, on the day of the duel, instead of turning and shooting, the guy shoots. So it's not a duel where you turn and shoot like kind of Western style. It's you take turns. So one person shoots and then the other person shoots, and they keep going until one person dies. So it's like guaranteed death. And so the other guy shoots first, just hits his ear, like misses, and then instead of him shooting back, he turns and throws his gun away. And everyone's like gasping, and like everyone's teasing him for it, like, you're so stupid. The other guy chooses to not shoot again though, and kind of forgives him and moves on. But then after a few days, people stop like making fun of him, and it becomes like this huge thing. People are like, whoa, like, and they're coming to him as like a source of like wisdom and inspiration. Like he's kind of like created like a big wave, right? Because he forgave this person who they had like a disagreement, right? And then one of the people that keeps visiting him and starts becoming his friend and visits every day is this really rich guy in town. And everyone's like, hey, why does this guy keep visiting him? And eventually the guy's like, well, I gotta tell you something. 14 years ago, I murdered somebody. And everyone's like, not everybody, because nobody knows except for Zosima. He's like, what? And they get the details, and he liked this girl, and man, it's been a while since I read it. Now, anyways, the gist of it is that something didn't work out between them, and he sneaks into her room and steals a bunch of stuff, kills her, and makes it seem like one of the servants did it. So he frames somebody for murder, escapes, got off scotch-free, and that's been tearing him apart on the inside since then. It's been 14 years. The guy has married since then, made his fortune, had a bunch of kids, but he still cannot live with himself because he knows that he's committed this murder, and he knows he hasn't atoned for that sin. And so eventually Zosima convinces him that, I think in order for you to live with yourself, the right thing to do would be to confess to this murder. And so he takes out all of the heirlooms that he stole, and he like lays out in front of the village people, and he basically manages to convince them that he did this murder. And I think actually he doesn't manage to convince people. I think instead people just think he's crazy, and they're not sure how he got the heirlooms. But he's built up such a good reputation for himself that people just assume that he's like gone mad, basically. Now, I forget exactly how that story ends, but the main point, I think, is that Dostoevsky wants us to consider what we would have done in that situation. Like, if we got away with murder, and it was eating us alive on the inside, would you continue to live your good life with tons of money and kids and family, or do you think you would have to confess? Now, it's hard to say, obviously, because you aren't in that situation. You don't know how it feels. But yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know. I can't. I'm a little bit tired. I don't know if I can say much more than that right now. Anyways, that's my summary, and not really analysis. Let's be honest. Mostly just a summary of part 2 of the Brothers Karamazov. So yeah, I haven't read any further than that. So stay tuned for part 3 and 4. Thanks, guys.